Why did every girl in your family lose their hair at 13? I found my sister's scalp in a jar under my grandmother's bathroom sink when I was 11. Not skin, not hair. Her actual scalp, preserved in clear liquid, with her name and date written on the label in my grandmother's perfect cursive. Violet Whitmore, March 2019. I dropped the jar and it didn't break, just rolled across the tile floor while I stood there trying to understand what I was looking at. The thing in the liquid had bumps all over it, small dark growths clustered in spiral patterns. They were moving, pulsing slowly like tiny hearts beating in rhythm. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs and shoved the jar back under the sink, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it again. When my grandmother walked in, I was washing my hands, trying to look normal. She smiled at me in the mirror, that cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Snooping, darling?" she asked sweetly. I shook my head, but she'd already seen my face. She knew. That night at dinner, my grandmother announced it was time to schedule my ceremony. I was turning 13 in 2 weeks, which meant I was ready for what she called the family tradition. My mother nodded approvingly while cutting her chicken into precise small bites. My sister Violet stared at her plate, her completely bald head reflecting the chandelier light. She'd been bald for 6 months now, ever since her own ceremony. I'd asked her once what happened during it, and she just looked at me with empty eyes and whispered, "You'll understand soon." My little sister Autumn was only 8 and still had hair, long blonde curls she was always brushing. She looked at me across the table with wide, scared eyes because she'd heard the whispers too. Every Whitmore girl lost her hair at 13. No one outside the family knew why. Now I'd seen that jar, seen what was left of Violet's scalp preserved like some kind of medical specimen, and I was supposed to just sit here eating green beans and pretend everything was normal. After dinner, I waited until everyone was asleep, then snuck back into my grandmother's bathroom. I needed to see that jar again, needed to confirm I hadn't imagined it. But when I looked under the sink, there were 5 more jars I hadn't noticed before, each one labeled with a name and date. My mother's scalp from 1995, my Aunt Naomi's from 1998, 2 others from women I didn't recognize, names that might have been my grandmother's sisters or cousins, and in the very back, a jar labeled Constance Whitmore, 1893. The scalp inside that one was gray and withered, but the dark bumps covering it were still moving, still pulsing after more than a century. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly the pictures came out blurry. When I tried to open one of the jars to see what those bumps actually were, it wouldn't budge. The lid was sealed too tight, or maybe locked somehow. I heard my grandmother's bedroom door open down the hall, and I ran, barefoot and silent, back to my room. The next morning, all the photos on my phone were gone. Not deleted, just gone, like they'd never existed. My camera roll showed the pictures I'd taken before and after, but the bathroom photos had vanished completely. At breakfast, my grandmother was watching me over her coffee cup. "Technology is so unreliable," she said pleasantly. "Photos disappear. Videos corrupt. It's why I prefer physical records. They're more permanent." My mother agreed, buttering her toast with mechanical precision. Violet ate her cereal in silence, and I noticed for the first time that her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the spoon. I wanted to ask her what they'd done to her during the ceremony, what happened to her original scalp, why there were bumps growing on her bald head now. But my grandmother's eyes were still on me, and I knew somehow that asking would make things worse. So I ate my eggs and tried to look calm while my mind raced with images of those preserved scalps, those moving growths. That jar dated 1893. School was the only place I felt safe anymore. I told my best friend Kayla about the jars during lunch, speaking quietly so no one else could hear. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Your grandmother keeps scalps in jars? That's insane. You should call the police." But I couldn't explain why I knew calling the police wouldn't help. My family was too careful, too prepared. If those jars had been illegal, they wouldn't be sitting under a bathroom sink where anyone could find them. They'd have better hiding places for actual evidence. Unless, I realized with a cold feeling in my stomach, unless they wanted me to find them. Unless showing me what happened to the other women was part of preparing me for what came next. Kayla made me promise to text her after my ceremony, to let her know I was okay. I promised, but I was already sure I wouldn't be able to keep it. Whatever happened during these ceremonies made girls like Violet go silent and empty. My 13th birthday arrived on a Saturday. My grandmother woke me at dawn by sitting on the edge of my bed, her cold hand stroking my hair. "Today you become a real Whitmore woman," she said softly. "Your mother and I are so proud." She was holding something, a small wooden box that looked ancient. She opened it to show me what was inside, a collection of seeds that looked almost black in the early morning light. They weren't plant seeds, though. They were too large, too irregularly shaped. One of them moved while I watched, rolling slightly in the velvet-lined box. "These are precious," my grandmother explained. "More valuable than you can imagine. They've been in our family for 6 generations, and today we plant them in you." I jerked away from her, but she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said, and her voice had gone cold. "Every girl fights at first. Every girl learns that fighting is pointless." She dragged me downstairs to the basement, and I fought every step. screaming for my mother, for Violet, for anyone to help me. My mother appeared at the top of the stairs, still in her bathrobe, and just watched as my grandmother pulled me down. Violet was already in the basement, sitting in a chair against the wall with that same empty expression. The room had been transformed into something between a medical lab and a torture chamber. Steel table in the center with restraints, bright surgical lights overhead, trays of instruments that looked medieval. My Aunt Naomi was there too, wearing surgical gloves and a mask, preparing syringes filled with clear liquid. "Hold her still," my grandmother commanded, and my mother came down the stairs to help. Together they strapped me to the table while I thrashed and screamed. No one in the neighborhood would hear me. The basement had been soundproofed years ago. "This is why we needed to prepare you psychologically," my grandmother said, disappointed. "We showed you the jars so you'd understand this was inevitable, but you're being difficult anyway." My Aunt Naomi injected something into my arm that made everything go fuzzy and slow. I could still feel everything, but I couldn't move anymore. Couldn't fight. My grandmother positioned herself above me, holding an electric razor. "First, we remove what you don't need," she explained, turning it on. The buzzing filled my ears as she shaved my head, long brown hair falling away in chunks. I wanted to cry but couldn't make my face work properly. When my head was completely bald, she rubbed something onto my scalp that burned. Not regular burning, but cold fire that seemed to sink into my skull. "This prepares the soil," she said. "Your scalp needs to be receptive to what we plant." She left the burning mixture on for exactly 20 minutes by a timer, then rinsed it off with ice water that made me gasp. My scalp was bright red and felt raw, like someone had taken sandpaper to it. That's when she opened the wooden box and took out one of those moving seeds. Up close, I could see the seed wasn't black, but deep purple, almost crystalline. It pulsed with its own rhythm, and when my grandmother held it close to my scalp, I felt something pull, like the seed was magnetic and my head was metal. "They know where they belong," my grandmother said with something like love in her voice. She pressed the seed against a specific point on my scalp and I felt it actually burrow into my skin like it was alive and drilling down. The pain was instant and overwhelming, worse than anything I'd imagined. I tried to scream but only managed a choking sound. My grandmother worked quickly, pressing seed after seed against my scalp in a spiral pattern. Each one burrowed in on its own, finding purchase in whatever that burning mixture had prepared. I counted 27 insertions before I lost consciousness. When I woke up, my head felt like it was splitting apart from the inside. Something was growing in there, spreading roots through layers of my scalp. I could feel them moving, threading through tissue that was never meant to host them. They kept me in the basement for 5 days, said I needed to stay still while the seeds took root properly. My mother brought food 3 times a day but wouldn't look at me. Violet visited once, sitting silently in the chair where she'd watch my procedure. Finally, she spoke. "It gets worse before it gets better," she whispered. "Right now, they're establishing their network, connecting to your nervous system. You'll feel things you don't have words for." She touched her own bald head, and I saw that the small bumps I'd noticed before were more pronounced now, almost like she had a second layer of skull growing under her skin. "What are they?" I managed to ask through the pain. She looked at the door to make sure we were alone. "They're alive," she breathed. "Grandmother calls them Vita seeds. They feed on us, grow in us, and every 2 weeks she harvests what they produce. We're just soil to her, just growing medium for something she sells." On the 6th day, my grandmother declared the rooting process complete and let me come upstairs. My scalp still hurt constantly, a deep ache that never faded. But worse was the sensation of things moving under my skin, adjusting position, spreading further. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw my bald head was covered in small raised bumps arranged in that same spiral pattern. Each bump had a tiny dark spot at the center, like something was trying to push through. I touched one gently and felt it pulse against my finger. Not my pulse. Something else. My grandmother appeared behind me in the mirror. "Beautiful," she said. "You're producing already. Sometimes it takes weeks, but your scalp is very receptive." She pressed her thumb against one of the bumps and I felt pressure deep in my skull, like she was pushing directly on my brain. "These will mature over the next 2 weeks. Then we do your first harvest." I tried to run away 3 times in those 2 weeks. The first time, I made it to the end of our street before pain exploded in my head, so intense I collapsed on the sidewalk. My mother picked me up and carried me back home like nothing had happened. "The seeds have a defense mechanism," she explained clinically. "Try to leave the property without permission, they trigger. Try to tell anyone outside the family what's happening, they trigger. Try to remove them yourself, they trigger. You're bound to us now." The second time I tried, I got as far as writing a note to Kayla explaining everything. The moment I tried to hand it to her at school, the pain hit so hard I vomited and passed out. I woke up in the nurse's office with my mother signing me out, making excuses about a medical condition that caused migraines. The third time, I didn't even make it out of my room. Just thinking too hard about escaping triggered warning pains that built until I gave up the thought entirely. I was trapped, completely trapped with things growing in my head that I couldn't remove, couldn't talk about, couldn't escape. The first harvest happened exactly 2 weeks after the implantation. My grandmother called it harvest like we were gardening, like I was a plant instead of a person. She had me sit in a special chair in the basement, leather restraints holding my arms down. "This might hurt," she said, which was the understatement of my life. She used what looked like tiny surgical scissors to cut open each bump on my scalp. The pain was sharp and immediate, but what came next was worse. From each opened bump, she extracted something small and dark with tweezers. The things writhed as she pulled them out, actually fought to stay inside me. I watched in the mirror she'd positioned in front of me and saw the extracted things moving in her collection tray. They looked like the seeds she'd planted, but smaller, darker, more active. "These are the fruits," my grandmother explained as she worked, her voice full of pride. "Worth $2,000 each on the market. You produced 22 your first cycle. That's $44,000 from your body in 2 weeks." She said it like I should be proud, like I'd accomplished something instead of having things carved out of my skull against my will. After the harvest, the bumps on my head started refilling immediately. I could feel new seeds developing, growing from the roots that had been planted. The cycle would repeat every 2 weeks for the rest of my life unless I found a way to stop it. My grandmother kept meticulous records of each harvest, noting which locations on my scalp produced the highest quality seeds, which extraction techniques caused the least scarring. She treated me like a crop rotation experiment. Between harvests, she made me apply special mixtures to my scalp every night, feeding the seeds growing inside me, keeping them healthy and productive. The mixtures burned and smelled horrible, but refusing meant punishment. The one time I didn't apply them, my grandmother did an extra harvest just 3 days later. The seeds weren't mature yet, and extracting them early was agony. I never refused again. I discovered my grandmother's client records when I was 14, hidden in a safe in her study. I'd learned the combination by watching her fingers, memorizing the pattern over months. Inside were 6 leather journals, transaction records going back to 1893. The earliest entries described how my great-great-great-grandmother Constance had acquired the original seeds from a woman in Romania who claimed they were cursed, or blessed, depending on perspective. Constance had experimented with planting them in various hosts before discovering that young girls' scalps provided the perfect environment. The seeds matured there, could be harvested repeatedly, and sold to wealthy buyers for purposes the journals only hinted at. Enhancement rituals, one entry said. Longevity treatments, said another. Transformation ceremonies. The prices had increased dramatically over the generations. What Constance sold for $50 per seed, my grandmother now sold for $2,000. The client list included names I recognized from news and business magazines. Powerful people, rich people, people who'd been buying Whitmore seeds for decades. The journals also contained something horrifying. Records of girls who'd tried to expose the family, what happened to them. One entry from 1947 described my great-grandmother's sister trying to go to police. Had to be dealt with permanently, the entry said. Body never found, reported as runaway. Another from 1973 detailed a cousin who'd told a teacher. Teacher died in car accident 3 days later. Cousin now understands consequences of talking. The pattern repeated throughout the generations. Girls who tried to escape died or disappeared. Witnesses who learned too much had fatal accidents. My family had been covering up this operation for over a century, and they were very good at it. I photographed every page with shaking hands, uploading them to a cloud account my grandmother didn't know existed. If something happened to me, at least there would be evidence somewhere, but I couldn't report it yet. Not while the seeds in my skull could trigger pain that would drop me before I got 2 words out. Not while my family had a century of practice making problems disappear. Autumn turned 11 and started asking questions. She'd been watching Violet and me for years, noticing patterns. The 2-week cycles. The way we'd disappear into the basement and come back pale and shaking. The bumps on our bald heads that seemed to move on their own. "I don't want my ceremony," she told me one night when our parents were out. "I'll run away before they do it to me." I wanted to tell her running was impossible, that the seeds made sure you couldn't escape. But I couldn't explain. Every time I tried to warn her directly, the pain started building. So instead, I told her stories. Stories about girls and other families who'd faced impossible situations and found ways out. Stories about being smart instead of brave. Stories about waiting for the right moment. She listened, and I saw her start planning. 11-year-olds can be surprisingly strategic when their survival depends on it. When I was 15, everything changed because of a boy. His name was Luca, and he moved in next door with his family. He was homeschooled, quiet, kept to himself mostly. But one afternoon, he was in his backyard when my grandmother was conducting a harvest in our basement. The window was cracked open because the room got hot during procedures, and my screams carried across the fence. I saw Luca freeze, his face going white. He didn't call the police or knock on our door, but the next day, he left a note in our mailbox addressed to me. Just 4 words. "Are you okay? Here." He'd included an email address. I couldn't respond directly. Any attempt to explain would trigger the seeds. But I could answer yes or no questions if they were phrased carefully. We started communicating that way, Luca asking increasingly specific questions as he pieced together what was happening. When he finally asked, "Is your family growing something in you?" I was able to respond yes. That's when he told me his uncle was a doctor who specialized in removing parasitic implants, not medical parasites. The other kind. Dr. Marcus Reeves had spent 20 years studying what he called embedded organisms, things that grew in human bodies but weren't supposed to be there. Not cancer, not infections, things that had been deliberately placed. He'd encountered Vitae seeds before, had removed them from 3 other girls whose families had similar traditions. Luca connected us through encrypted messages, and Dr. Reeves explained the removal process. It was surgery, yes, but also something else. The seeds had rooted in ways that weren't purely physical. They'd integrated with my nervous system, created the pain triggers, essentially hacked my brain to keep me compliant. Removing them required disrupting those connections while extracting the physical organisms. It was dangerous. 40% chance of permanent neurological damage, 15% chance of death, but staying meant a lifetime of harvests. How many girls survived staying? I asked. Dr. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. In my research, I found records of 47 families practicing this over the past century. Most girls don't live past 30. The constant harvesting, the seeds feeding on your nutrients, the trauma, your body eventually gives up. I decided to run on a harvest day. My grandmother would expect me to be weak and compliant afterward, easy to keep contained. Luca planned everything. His uncle would have a surgical room ready. Luca would drive us in his mom's car, which he'd been learning to drive illegally in parking lots. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only chance I'd get. The harvest that day was brutal. 28 seeds extracted over 2 hours. New personal record, my grandmother said proudly. She left me in the basement recovery room, assuming I'd sleep for hours. Instead, I forced myself to stand the moment she went upstairs. Every movement sent shockwaves through my wounded scalp, but I made it to the window. Luca was waiting outside. He helped pull me through, and we stumbled to the car. The seeds started triggering the moment we left the property, warning pains building rapidly. By the time we hit the highway, I was screaming. Luca drove faster, talking to me constantly, keeping me conscious. Hold on. We're almost there. Don't give up now. But almost wasn't close enough. The pain reached levels that made my vision go black. I felt myself dying, felt my brain shutting down from the overload. Everything went dark somewhere near the state line. I woke up on an operating table, bright lights above me. Someone with kind eyes looking down. You're safe, a voice said. Dr. Reeves, you've been unconscious for 6 hours. We need to operate now, while your family is still looking in the wrong places. But I need your consent. He explained everything while I floated in morphine haze. The seeds had rooted deeper than he'd expected, sent tendrils into my dural layers. Removing them would require cutting into my skull, peeling back layers, finding where they'd attached to my nervous system, and severing those connections without causing other damage. I'd be awake for most of it because he needed me to report what I felt. It would take 12 hours. It would be the worst pain I'd ever experienced. I might not survive. But if I do survive, I whispered, then you'll be free, he said simply. The seeds will be gone. The triggers will be disabled. You can tell anyone anything without pain. You can live. I signed the consent forms with shaking hands. Luca held one hand while a nurse held the other. Dr. Reeves started cutting. The surgery was endless nightmare. He was right about needing me conscious. Every time he touched a tendril or seed root, I had to describe the sensation so he knew what he was severing. Burning, tearing, electric, crushing. The vocabulary of pain expanded beyond anything I'd imagined. 6 hours in, he found the trigger mechanism. A nodule attached to specific neural pathways, essentially a bomb wired to my pain centers. Disabling it meant cutting the connections without triggering them first. He worked for 3 hours on that alone, testing each pathway by having me think about exposure while monitoring my responses. When he finally severed the last connection, I felt something break inside my mind. A weight lifting. For the first time in 2 years, I thought about telling someone the truth and nothing happened. No pain, no warning, nothing. I started laughing through my tears. Dr. Reeves smiled. That's the sound of freedom, he said, and kept cutting. They removed 27 mature seeds, 14 developing ones, and approximately 300 meters of root tendrils from my scalp. Dr. Reeves preserved them all in solution so I'd have evidence. These are worth approximately $82,000 on the black market based on your grandmother's pricing, he said. Your family has been harvesting this from you every 2 weeks for 2 years. That's roughly $2.1 million they've extracted from your body. The number made me sick. I'd been a goldmine to them, not a grandchild. The surgical wounds needed weeks to heal. Until then, I stayed in Dr. Reeves's secure facility, a small clinic he ran for people escaping situations like mine. Luca visited daily, bringing me food and news. My family had reported me as a runaway with severe mental illness. Police were looking half-heartedly. I was 15, not a high priority. But Luca also brought darker news. Autumn's ceremony had been moved up. My grandmother was implanting her next week, claiming they needed to maintain production levels after losing me. That decided it. I couldn't just escape and leave Autumn to the same fate. Dr. Reeves connected me with Detective Winters, who specialized in organized family abuse cases with unusual elements. I sat in his office and told him everything, showing my healing scalp with its surgical scars, showing the preserved seeds that still moved slightly in their jars, giving him everything I'd photographed from my grandmother's journals. Detective Winters listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This is going to be complicated," he said. "The seeds, if they're what you say, involve elements the legal system doesn't handle well. But the abuse is clear. Child endangerment, assault, false imprisonment, we can build a case." He started an investigation quietly, but bureaucracy moved slowly, and my family moved fast. Within days, they'd completed Autumn's implantation ceremony. I'd failed to save her. My baby sister now had seeds growing in her skull just like I'd had. The raid happened on Autumn's first scheduled harvest day. Detective Winters coordinated it perfectly. They hit the house at the exact time my grandmother would be in the basement with Autumn, conducting the procedure. I wasn't there, couldn't be there legally, but Luca's family had a police scanner and we listened to everything. Officers entered, found the basement surgery setup, found my grandmother with 11-year-old Autumn strapped to the harvest chair screaming, found the refrigerated case with 2 years of collected seeds from me, 6 months from Violet, 2 weeks worth from Autumn. My grandmother tried to claim it was legitimate medical practice, that she was treating a rare genetic skin condition. But the restraints, the screaming child, the jars of things that moved on their own, you couldn't explain that away. They arrested my grandmother, my mother, and my Aunt Naomi. They found Violet in her room unconscious from an overdose of sleeping pills. She'd taken them that morning. This time, she didn't survive. Violet's death changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just weird family practices. This was about a 16-year-old who'd chosen death over one more harvest. The medical examiner found evidence of chronic trauma, malnutrition from the seeds feeding on her, permanent neurological changes. The official cause was suicide, but the report noted she'd been living in conditions constituting torture. Media exploded. Seed girls became headline news. Family growing organisms and daughters' scalps for profit. My grandmother's client list leaked. Detective Winters claimed he didn't know how, and suddenly 43 wealthy names were connected to purchasing biological materials harvested from children. The scandal grew exponentially. 3 clients committed suicide before questioning. 5 fled the country. The rest lawyered up and claimed ignorance about where the seeds came from. The trial was 6 months of horror. My grandmother's defense claimed religious freedom, ancient spiritual practice, parental rights. The prosecution countered with my testimony, Autumn's testimony, Violet's autopsy. They brought Dr. Reeves as expert witness to explain the parasitic nature of the seeds. The jury looked increasingly disturbed as evidence mounted. Photos of my scarred scalp, the preserved seeds that still moved in their jars. Audio Luca had secretly recorded of one of my harvests. My grandmother's journals documenting 130 years of this practice. The defense's biggest challenge was explaining the trigger mechanisms. How did the family ensure silence? The prosecution demonstrated by having me, in controlled conditions with monitoring equipment, speak freely about the abuse without pain. Then showed brain scans from before and after Dr. Reeves' surgery. A neurologist testified the trigger mechanisms were sophisticated biological engineering, part of the seed's parasitic life cycle, to ensure their host bodies remained viable. My grandmother got life without parole. My mother got 40 years. My Aunt Naomi turned state's evidence and testified about the buyers getting 20 years in exchange. The fallout rippled outward. Investigations opened into 31 of the families on my grandmother's client list. Most refused to explain what they used the seeds for, but 3 buyers talked. One admitted to consuming them, claiming they enhanced cognitive function and extended lifespan. He was 78, but looked 50, and medical tests showed cellular regeneration that shouldn't be possible. Another had planted them in experimental gardens, trying to cultivate them independently for mass production. A third hinted at darker uses, rituals and practices, involving the life force the seeds stored from their hosts. The seeds themselves were sent to classified research facilities. Reports leaked that they weren't any known species. Possibly ancient genetic engineering, possibly something else entirely. The samples were supposedly destroyed, but I don't believe that. Things that valuable don't just get burned. Autumn couldn't have the removal surgery immediately. She was too young, her skull still developing. Dr. Reeves couldn't risk it, so she lived in specialized foster care with seeds still rooted in her head, producing harvests no one collected. The ungathered seeds caused pain, building pressure as they matured with nowhere to go. She had to wear special compression bandages to manage it. She'd need surgery when she turned 14, still 2.5 years away. I visited 3 times a week, and we'd sit together, both of us bald, both of us scarred. I told her stories about the future, about life after seeds, about freedom. She listened, but her eyes were already getting that empty look Violet had, the look of someone who'd given up. I was terrified I'd lose her too. I'm 18 now, working with an organization that helps other seed girls from the 12 families we've identified so far. Some cases are like mine, girls grown for harvesting. Others are variations on the theme, girls whose families grow different organisms in them, girls used as incubators for things that shouldn't exist. The network is larger than anyone knew, hidden in plain sight for generations. Each family with their own twisted tradition, their own justifications. We're exposing them one by one, but it's slow work. Last month we got 3 more girls out. 2 survived their removal surgeries. 1 didn't. I attended her funeral and cried for another Violet, another girl who'd been someone's crop instead of someone's child. Autumn finally got her surgery last month. She turned 14 in February, and Dr. Reeves scheduled it for March. I held her hand going in. The surgery took 15 hours because her seeds had rooted deeper than mine, had more time to integrate. When she woke up, the first thing she did was touch her head, feel the bandages. Then she looked at me and smiled. Actually smiled for the first time in 3 years. "They're gone?" she whispered. "All gone," I confirmed. She started crying. So did I. Dr. Reeves gave us the moment, then showed us what he'd removed. 31 mature seeds, 22 developing ones, nearly 400 meters of root tendrils. Autumn's body had been more productive than mine, had accepted the parasites more completely. "You would have died within 5 years," Dr. Reeves told her gently. "Your body was already showing signs of depletion." She just nodded, like she'd known, like she'd felt herself dying from the inside. We visit Violet's grave together once a month, Autumn and I. Bring her flowers, tell her stories about the girls we're saving. Sometimes I wonder if she can hear us, if wherever she is, she knows her death meant something. The trial, the exposure, the investigations, none of it would have happened without her autopsy revealing the extent of the horror. She saved dozens of other girls by dying, which is a terrible legacy, but better than dying for nothing. Autumn leaves special flowers, purple ones that look almost black in certain lights. She would have liked these, Autumn says every time. And I agree, even though I don't know if Violet liked any kind of flower. The seeds had taken so much of who she was, I'm not sure what remained at the end. My hair is growing back finally. 2.5 years after surgery, I have about 3 inches of it. It grows slowly, patchy in places where the scarring is worst. Autumn's will take longer because her seeds went deeper. We joke about getting matching wigs, but neither of us can stand the thought of covering our heads with anything. We wear our baldness like badges now, proof we survived. The scars tell stories to people who know how to read them. Spiral patterns of surgical sites, discolored patches where the seeds rooted deepest. Other survivors recognize us instantly. We recognize them too. There's a girl I'm working with now, 14 years old. Family's been harvesting seeds from her for 9 months. She contacted me through the network last week. Her grandmother showed her the jars, just like mine did. Her ceremony is scheduled for her sister next month. She wants to run, wants to save her sister. I'm helping her plan it, coordinating with Dr. Reeves, arranging the escape route. It's dangerous. Her family might be more violent than mine, but doing nothing means 2 more girls spend their lives as crops. So we plan and hope and prepare, because someone helped me escape. Someone helped Autumn survive. And now it's my turn to be the someone for another scared girl who just learned what her family really is. Thanks for hanging out till the end. If you want more stories, make sure to subscribe and leave your take below.